Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining us for our presentation with Craig Downer today. I'm going to just give it a few more seconds here to keep admitting people in, and then we will get started. All right, welcome everybody. We have our last presentation for today, Saturday. I believe it's Saturday still for some of us. Some of you might be Sunday now. And we are happy to welcome Craig Downer today. He's going to give us a fantastic presentation on burros to follow up with the presentation that we just received from Kathy and Lori. We always want to remember our wild burros when we're talking about our wild horses. Craig Downer is the founder and president of the nonprofit 50c3, the Andean Tapir Fund, and its branch, the Wild Horse and Burro Fund. He continues to work as a wildlife ecologist and has conducted several field studies, including the Sulphur Spanish Mustang herd in western Utah and several other herds in Arizona, Nevada, California, and Utah, all of which resulted in professional results. Craig wrote the scholarly and well-rounded and illustrated book, The Wild Horse Conspiracy, available on Amazon. And I just want to add on a personal note, I've known Craig for a few years now, and I have read some of his PDFs that he's written. He does these extensive studies in some of the herd areas, and I have read a couple of those before I have visited herd areas, specifically the one he wrote on the Surbot herd in Arizona. And it was very interesting to read that and then know what to look for when I went out on the range as far as native plants versus non-native plants, etc. So if you guys ever see that he's made one of those PDFs available and you plan to go out on the range, I highly recommend reading it. All right, Craig, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you now.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate this opportunity to share my knowledge and experience. As Heather said, I'm a wildlife ecologist, and I've had quite a bit of education in my life. Seemed like I never wanted to stop keeping going back to the universities. I would take breaks, so in between to uh, explore our beautiful world. So I've traveled quite a bit, different places. It's turned out that my specialty is in the world's wild paracedactyls, and that is a mammalian order that includes the horse family, zebras, asses, and caballine horses, as well as the tapirs and the rhinos. And it's really quite an ancient order and a very important order, but it's also a threatened and endangered order. Most of these species are on the red list, and they're sort of find themselves to be targeted by various vested interests. Um, they shouldn't be, because they're actually wonderful gardeners. All of them are natural gardeners, and they have a number of differences, including their odd-toed conformation of the foot. So that means that the main axis of weight is borne on the central digit. And you can see that here in the illustration. There's a tapir foot on the left, and then there's a rhino foot in the middle with 3, and then the single hoof for the horse. Another thing is their different digestive system from the cloven hoof rumen ferment digesters, which are most of the grazers that are promoted and herbivores that are promoted by people. Probably has a lot to do with their consumptive habits of what they eat and what they derive material benefit from. But they should really pay much more attention to these animals because they're great balancers and they're great ecosystem restorers. And I also have realized that they're superior carbon sequesters, and they're able to tolerate drier, more flammable vegetation. and survive in actual quite marginal areas where dry tinder-like vegetation develops, and with their long limbs they can and single hoofs they can reach quite rocky and steep areas, is often where lightning strikes happen. So these are major considerations today, and that's certainly true with the burros. They're very wise old animals, and I recently did an appeal to stop the roundup out at the Marietta. I listed all my points for the Interior Board of Land Appeals, and I gave them a good photo essay, but they didn't really address my points. They just looked for loopholes. So we've really got to uh, hammer in these greater truths about these wonderful animals and the true intent and spirit of the Wild Free Roaming Horse and Burros Act, which says they should be the principal presences in their legal areas on the BLM and Forest Service lands, and elsewhere is in the national parks where they belong. There's no law says they have to get rid of them. They're such wonderful animals, and certainly want to commend Chris and all the people that have saved the Theodore Roosevelt wild horses, that old historical herd. So these are the main points. Now in the whole order, there are six genera and 16, some say 17 to 18 species. And quite a few, as I say, are on the list. You can see where their distribution is, the equidae pretty much all over the place. But actually the cradle, as I've learned in my evolutionary studies, the cradle for all of these is centers around North America. That's where their ancient origin goes in. Shortly after the dinosaurs' demise, a little over 60 million years ago, or a little under for these animals here, the often quoted 55 to 58 million for the equidae. There we talk about the ones that are threatened. Number of species have gone extinct, and a lot more subspecies. Now, as our law, the Wild Free Roaming Horse and Burros Act protects both the wild horses and the wild burros, I'd like to bring up the point that these wild burros, and I was going to show you, if you had a screen on me, I was going to show you a graph from this textbook on evolution of the horse family, that actually the great majority of the lineage that led to the asses, the ass branch, is clearly in North America. You're going clear back to Dinahippus, which is very burro-like, and that was in the Hemophilian period, and then it went through the Blancan and Pleistocene, all in North America, and then on up into the Holocene, and then went through Eurasia and clear on down to Africa. So to say that it is an exotic, I think really shows a very narrow scope of understanding. And I wanted to read briefly from my book, The Wild Horse Conspiracy, where I talk about the burro. Here's what I wrote. The burro, in similar fashion to the wild horse, the burro, Equus asinus, can trace its not far removed ancestry back to North America. And in many parts of this continent, wild ass fossils testify to a very similar species occupying a very similar niche as the one reoccupied by burros in recent centuries. It is a sad testimony that in blatant contravention of their rights under the Wild Free-Roaming Horses and Burros Act of 1971, wild burros have been almost entirely eliminated from their legal herd areas and territories throughout the West. I refer you to a study by Cindy McDonald in Las Vegas. Now, McFadden, this paleontologist and World's Authority, he indicates that the ass branch of Equidae evolved in North America throughout the Hemiphilian, Blancan, and Pleistocene periods, when one Equus mexicanus was clearly present. And that's where I was going to show you the figure, but that's okay. It's on page 112 of McFadden's famous book, Fossil Horses. Though the modern burro or donkey is currently considered as having originated from the so-called African wild asses, Equus africanus, and can and does produce fertile offspring with such, it is most probably not significantly different from its North American ancestors. Indeed, one respected paleontologist believes that the African wild ass originally arose in North America. That was Klingel, and he espoused that in a symposium at the University of Wyoming. And until recently, both burro and African wild ass were considered to be the same species, namely Equus asinus, which is still the case in many circles. Like the wild horse, when returned to North America, the burro readily adapts to an ecological niche which its not so distant ancestors filled for millions of years, particularly, I gather, in the dry southwestern US and south into Mexico. The distinction between Equus asinus and Equus africanus seems more a political one than a sound biological one. And it's really a shame these extremely low appropriate management levels that are being assigned to them. Anyway, I want to mention the appropriate management level nationwide that has been decided by BLM is under 3,000. It's something like 2,800. Or 2,900. That is outrageous. That represents, if you look at their original herd areas, that's like about one wild burro for every several square miles. And how any judge could, in his right mind, could say that was obeying the Wild Free Roaming Horses and Burros Act is crazy. But anyway, that's what we're dealing with. So we just have to keep standing up for what's right and for all the good things these wonderful ancient animals do. Here this shows the relationships between the different, going back millions of years, how they branched out, which is really quite fascinating to kind of get the great overview. And that's kind of what we're lacking today. It's the great overview. It seems that too many people are just as absorbed with their own immediate indulgences, and they don't see what a beautiful world we live in, and that we have to learn to share, that all these creatures, these species, belong together and make a world possible. And that's certainly true of these wild horses and burros, and they mostly fulfill their true role, I believe, in nature. So here are all the positive things that the Perissodactyl do. And you notice the Equidae do them all. And a lot of this has to do with their differences, that they have upper and lower incisors, unlike the artiodactyl ruminant, cloven-hoofed herbivores. Now, they increase soil humus to a much greater degree because they don't as thoroughly digest what they ingest. By the same token, they disperse a lot more seeds that are intact, of a greater variety, and they're very mobile. They move around. They have those long legs and those single hoofs, allows them to run and to overcome obstacles in an amazing way. Uh, since they are bolstering the plant community, obviously and they're enriching the soils, they're greatly enhancing the life community or ecosystem. So they're increasing the species diversity or biodiversity. Um, they also, both the horses and the burros, and there's been some real good work lately to show that the wild burros will sniff out water and reveal underground sources and create little desert oases. Uh, Yet they would often be targeted for elimination in areas where actually they were being very beneficial. And one case in point is Ash Meadows. They're in southern Nevada, which has some endangered desert fish like the devil's hole pupfish and several others. Well, these kind of blind know-it-alls, they said, oh, let's get rid of the burros and the horses here because they will ruin the habitat for the endangered fish. Well, okay, they did, and several of those populations died out because they weren't there to keep the water open. So that relates to this. They open water sources. And you see that also in the Salt River, where I did a study in Arizona, the lower Salt River, which has a beautiful herd of wild horses, and they harvest the eel grass, and then they transport the nutrients up into the Sonoran Desert, and greatly they keep the flow going, and it's actually a very biodiverse ecosystem. But certain narrow-minded people, they're just you can't open their minds. They just have that tunnel vision. But we just got to keep standing up and doing what's right. And I know people like Simone Netherlands are certainly standing up, which I greatly appreciate, and really got to take my hat off to them. So since they can subsist on drier, coarser vegetation, and they don't have to expend as much metabolic energy as the cloven-hoofed ruminants, in many what would be considered quite marginal areas, where a lot of these typical animals need a more abundant habitat, they're able to subsist and reduce the dry flammable vegetation, which is a great contribution today, especially since we're on a planet that's heating up. I call it global heating rather than just global warming. This is a very serious issue. It should be like #1 priority for all of us, and certainly the people in authority, the politicians. They open thickets, they prevent brush from totally crowding out, and so they are great grasslands, meadows, prairie, plain grassland promoters and creators. That relates to increased grasslands. They are selective in their forage to a degree, but then they have a wide variety of plants they can take. They certainly tend, especially the horses, tend to take grass, preferably, but they can eat a lot of browse and leaves from shrubs and whatnot. And I'd say the burro here is probably a little broader in its ability to take coarser bushes and even thorny little forbs and bushes. Of course, they do serve as a prey animal. The mountain lions are well known to prey on both the wild horse and burros. And there's been studies by John Turner and others showing that they're in the Montgomery Pass around Mono Lake in California and going over into Nevada, that the horses there are pretty self-stabilizing and have been for generations. they, yeah, being natural gardeners in many areas in the earlier presentations today by the lady from Germany, for example, it showed how in areas that have been degraded, they're allowing the horses to go in. They say they've been overgrazed by sheep or cattle. They can restore the soils, restore the biodiversity, and they're wonderful complements of these animals, and they're beautiful to watch. So there's real interest from people too. I think, as I put it, they kind of upgrade the vibration of the area. Also, it's known that in really cold areas, they can open the ice over snow-covered forage and water, and they can help many different species survive in that regard. We already went into how they complement the ruminants, and I did the whole study about for love wild horses. Actually, they gave me a little help, and I did a scholarly study that was published, and you can see that on different sites. So in that regard, they're right in line with combating global warming, and they're a superior carbon sequester over the ruminant grazers. I'm not saying they don't have their place, certainly do, but um, it's just a fact. And there's, of course, a lot of public interest. How could you fail to, of course, because of their association with mankind and having helped us for thousands of years, we have an affinity for them. Uh, but their greater story is in the world of nature. And see, I wanted to read another little section here. See, it was to do with um, of my book. It talked about, hope I didn't lose the marker to that. Ah, yeah, I was going to talk a little bit about I've been very associated with the Marietta Wild Burro Range, and very upset about what a low appropriate management level they've assigned to that area. Oh yeah, I wanted to say that concerning the social structure of the burros, that it's different from that of the horses. It's less hierarchical, and their breeding is more promiscuous. A jack male burro will defend his territory, thus gaining reproductive advantage with the jennies. Burros are exquisitely adapted to the hot, dry deserts of southern Nevada, and also there's a lot of ones in Arizona, which has the most burros of any state. Anyway, here they refill an ecological niche occupied by their ancestors of not too distant past, paleontologically speaking. I think there's only several thousand left now, and if they want to take them down to, might be more like around 10, but if they want to take them down to less than 3, and in many of their herd management areas, they're only leaving like 10 to 20 or maybe 30. And, even according to Cawthron, just Gus Cawthron standards of 200, there's about 70% of our herds are not genetically viable. And now I'm a member of the World Conservation Union. That's the IUCN Species Survival Commission. And I've done, a lot of work on endangered species. And actually, for the equid specialist group, for a population in the wild, they recommend a population of 2,000 500 intact individuals. And for one that's on the brink of extinction, that's under total control, they're just desperately trying to save the species, then they recommend 500. But to say that only 200 is going to make it for preserving a population, because the Endangered Species Act also treats of populations, then I think we should clearly understand that our public officials just don't seem to care. And why aren't they listening to some of the world's real experts on this subject? Okay, well, here I just sort of go into greater detail about all the different things they do. It's really important to bear in mind the importance of soils, which are the foundation of so much that concerns our terrestrial ecosystems. And a great believer in letting people need to develop much more respect for these animals and much less kind of overbearing desire to control and modify these wonderful species. Now, recently there was a study by Odati and several ecologists there in Africa, and they spent years studying the relations between the zebras and the great variety of other herbivores, most of which are cloven hoof ruminant digesting herbivores. And they found that actually without the zebras, they were not thriving. The zebras were contributing greatly to their well-being. And this graph showed that without the zebras, or in this case, the donkeys, because there have been various studies of this sort, the cattle did not gain as much weight, and they just weren't as generally as fit for survival. Cattle and donkeys herded together gained more weight, had more balanced diets, and were healthier than when herded separately. So that's called facilitation in ecological terms. They facilitate one another. They don't just compete with each other. They found that here with the plains, and there's some really good studies on this. I remember they were like really elemental in my education as an ecologist, and I can give you the sources, but I am doing an update now of my book, The Wild Horse Conspiracy. So any input that any of you would care to give, I'd appreciate it. Okay, here in Kenya also, you saw the same thing with the donkeys. But it's particularly in the wet season they found this benefit. And kind of like safety in numbers too, with all those predators around there, really dynamic ecosystem. By the way, the elephants also have a very similar digestive system to the perissodactyl, and they can enrich soils and plant a lot of seeds as well. So there's two forms of dispersing the seeds. One is endo, that means they swallow the fruit and then defecate it out. And by the way, they then provide a fertile germination bed. And the other is called epi. That means the seed often has little burrs or spikes, and it clings to the fur, and then they go go elsewhere. And often this is a great benefit to the particular species of plant because there's a lot of seed predation. But if they can get away from where most of the seeds land and go away from all those little rodents and whatnot, then they can have a better chance of germinating. For example, this study showed that in the dung of the rhino, 16% of the seedlings produced well away from the crown of the tree. And all these animals are very important for trees. Many very important woodland or forest trees depend on these larger animals for their reproduction. And that's why when these so-called megafauna have disappeared, many tree species, I'm sure, have become extinct or are endangered. And I brought that up with the Bonaire burros or wild donkeys down in the West Dutch Indies, where I was called to do a study. And I indicated from Daniel Jansen's work there in Central America that they shouldn't get rid of these burros because they're the ones that could help restore the forest on the Bonaire Island. But some of those Dutch people the natives seemed to get it more than the Dutch, but there were some really good Dutch people too that got the message as well. Yeah, well, there's been really elaborate studies of this, and we really need these animals, like even in places like Australia, where the brumbies restore this role of the large megafauna, particularly the herbivores. They're so key in reproduction of so many different plants. And I've also did a study down there and gave a presentation in Australia about the brumbies, and also there's wild donkeys there. And recently it's been proven that in areas of extreme degradation, very dry areas in the Kimberley, where I was also there, they actually help restore the ecosystem so that this cattle rancher could continue to ranch, because otherwise he was going out of business. And he did a video on this actually. So yeah, really, really good point to recognize. And much of this presentation, by the way, I gave to the Nelson Science Society there. It's a branch of the Royal Society in New Zealand, in the South Island, a few years ago, and they seem to really appreciate it. They're also really important in pollination. Many of the little insects that are pollinators actually thrive in the presence of these equids and other parasitactyls. I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that their droppings are still pretty intact. I mean, the molecules are pretty intact organic molecules, so they provide substance not only to the soils but to a variety of insects and lizards, and rodents and birds. So actually, they enhance ecosystems. So many of these studies are just so overwhelming that how we get people to value them, that's our challenge as wild horse and burro advocates. There are just so many things going for them. Just looking at the sheer quantities of manure that, say, a horse or a burro produce, it's incredible. So I can see why. Hey, you got a gardener here, and he knows and he has ancient instincts about where to go, what to prune, where to defecate. It's just a subject of great fascination. And by the way, of course, they both the burros and the horses, they range a lot further from water than do the cattle. And many of the domestic sheep, of course, are just herded to strip the vegetation. So if we're talking harmony and restoring restoration of ecosystems, hey, they're God's gift to our earth. And there's been studies in Australia too. And as I told the Aussies when I was down there at the conference, hey, just because they didn't evolve here for millions of years doesn't mean they don't do good things, and they couldn't actually help the marsupials and all the ones that have been here. There seems to be too much emphasis in our society on kind of vicious dog eat dog competition. Let's look at the positive things, and also the fact that life is always evolving. We're always changing and moving around, and how hypocritical for these people, mainly of European descent, to come in and then bring so many other species, including sheep and uh, rabbits and sparrows and all kinds of exotic animals, and then suddenly, oh yeah, hey, these horses, they're just doing so much destruction and everything. So kind of obvious, and then overlook all the other ones like that they've brought in. Well, it's kind of like too late. And aren't you using them more as a red herring or a diversion for what you are largely responsible for? And there have been terrific fires there in Australia. And of course, I bring in here the wild donkeys as well. They're in Australia. There's a lot of them. But it seems like kind of like a person, like people that are experiencing kind of a tantrum because they realize, hey, there's certain things that aren't like it used to be. And yes, there's a lot of species to save there in Australia. But I said, well, why don't you build log and pole fences, which work great? They work. I've seen them in the priors. I don't agree with them there because the horses there actually help the highland meadows, but they need a scapegoat, and that's the same thing here. They say, oh, the horse is a really noticeable animal or the burro, so hey, let's blame the horse, and then let's do a PR job on them. I think that is just so despicable and wrong, morally wrong, and then to overlook all these fine or obvious points that are in their favor, like in the Salt River, where the Center for Biological Diversity and the Audubon Society have decided to go after those beautiful wild horses. There I show in a picture I took of the squash germinating there. And so many, I did a study there, and which I believe helped save those. I did a little film with Tom Porter, who acted as my assistant. And I just pointed out, hey, they're not destroying this ecosystem. They're helping this ecosystem. They're clearing it of eelgrass. They're transporting the nutrients from the river up into the dry Sonora Desert. They're helping the desert plants and animals. Why are you overlooking this? And they're very popular. It's like the second most popular site on the U.S. Forest Service recreational areas. So anyway, I've done my homework on this. Oh yes, I do want to thank Nancy McCormish for helping me make this really fine presentation, which has impressed those that I've shown it to. She's a environmental scientist. It's quite specialized in equids, and she grew up on a ranch there in Colorado. But she also is just so disgusted with how narrow-minded people can be when it comes to the wild horses and burros. So this just shows you the anatomy of a horse, which is of course very similar to that of the burro. And they have a small little stomach, a rapid passage, and that's an advantage when you're dealing with dry matter because you don't have to as thoroughly digest it with all those multiple stomachs. They pass a lot of fiber, a lot of seeds intact and ready to germinate. And the fecal, quote, she called them apples, they hold and widely disperse these seeds and prevent a fertile germinative bed for the plants. So they're truly, I would classify them as keystone species for sure. Anyway, lot of movement. Their nature is to move out, and obvious from their long limbs and their anatomy, and especially the horses and their they develop their bands, the harem bands of the horses develop keen attunement to their habitats, and the older horses, both the mares particularly and also the stallions, develop kind of a wisdom about the seasonality, the phenology of the plants, when they are ready to eat, when they blossom, and they really tend the ecosystem if we allow them. Now, I want to say that these drastic roundups that break up the social structures, the infrastructures, they really set that way back. And then you're left with a bunch of frantic horses and burros running around. It's really a torture. They should let them adapt and self-stabilize, and they should realize it's the mature social units, the bands and the territorial harems of the burros, the bands of the horses, that actually self-stabilize the horses, since the older horse or burros, they repress the reproduction in the younger ones. So why are they ignoring all these wonderful things that they do automatically? And I'm a great believer in the reserve design and rewilding approach to conserving the wild horse and burros. I'm not a fan of tampering with their intimate parts, their reproductive systems. I believe that's a sellout, and it's actually a form of domestication. And I've studied into this and done some articles on it. And I just think, hey, we gotta take the pure stand about the true spirit and intent of the Wild Free Roaming Horses and Burros Act. And remember, I knew and worked with Wild Horse Annie in my early years, as did my mother and father and sister and brother. We all helped out, and we're not so ready to subject these animals to artificial manipulation, because it just wasn't in the true vision. Here, a very similar one to the wild burros, the Asiatic wild ass, which is actually a bit of a different species, more to the east there. It's been reintroduced and shown to greatly restore areas, facilitate key ecosystem functions, and greatly contributes to the biodiversity there in Israel, which I visited also. I actually worked on Kibbutz Dan for a while, and I was able to travel all over on my big motor scooter and stay at various places, and got to see some of these animals. Really special place. That what a tragedy today about all the violence that's gone on there. but they do some really, really good things there, like restoring these Asiatic wild asses and having the open mind to value them and in their own right. There's been studies here of the horses in California in areas where they've actually zeroed out these wild horses, but the studies themselves showed that they were increasing plant diversity and that they were creating natural fire breaks. You just had to take the big picture. But that's something a lot of our bureaucrats aren't into doing. They kind of they have what you call tunnel vision for their predetermined agenda. They pick and choose and twist the interpretations. And as a scholar, I think that I find that very abhorrent. So they did their homework. This study was objective by Osterman and Atwill. So you'll have all these and you can really dive into it yourself. But I tell you, it's a challenge because prejudice is an ugly thing. And people do not like to be exposed, particularly people that are in positions or have degrees. And if you show that they're being unfair and dishonest, then they get all riled up. So just be prepared. But I tell you, we have to have courage. And, it's always good to try and be polite and respectful. But I believe there comes a time when you have to be direct and firm and just act like hey, I know what I have learned, and I'm not going to be cowed. This is going into the Salt River Management Area and showed actually it's a very biologically rich area and has a great variety of birds. So why is the Audubon Society saying they don't belong? And there's even bald eagles there. I think it's a case of, hey, they have this guy named Ted Williams who they allowed to do outrageous essays in that award-winning Audubon magazine, and no oversight whatsoever. And you write to the Audubon magazine, you say, hey, this guy is just on a hate binge to destroy the wild horses and their image. See, these are the things we have to stand up to. And of course, they expect us to be the mild-mannered, meek people when they're the ones who are being outrageously insulting and disrespectful, particularly of the horses and burros themselves. There's just all kinds of evidence, and the German lady mentioned many of these areas. So there's been very meticulous studies to show that the droppings of the horses actually seem to increase this Ellenberg nitrogen indicator value, which is very linked to seed germination and success. So quite amazing studies that have been done. So they've proven many places, the Exmoor ponies, very valuable there, the Dartmoors. They've linked it to little rodents that actually benefit from the seeds, and they get water and germinating. Now, it was mentioned in the study by Love Wild Horses that in their area where they're letting the horses restore the ecosystem, they're showing that the Mexican jumping mouse is doing better there, the one that they usually try and blame on the horses. And I find that's also true with the greater sage grouse, that they're kind of like overlooking the obvious, but again, shamelessly using the wild horses as scapegoats. And oh yeah, and these particular mice, they are able to actually transport some of these seeds, and then they spit them out or something, or defecate them, and they go on and germinate. So the mice are in on the act as well. In Belgium, there's just been some incredibly detailed and statistically and analyzed studies that have done to show the great benefits of the equids. They reviewed thousands of different species and showed that the horses are actually helping large percentage of these in their reproductive process. So truly keystone species in a variety of ecosystems. Here in an island in the Mediterranean, they did an elaborate study of, here we are, gray donkeys, that's what I'm supposed to be focusing on, and goats. And they showed that of all the species, 90 plant species from 17 families germinate in the dung samples of the donkeys, 72 plant species from 23 corresponding plant families in the goat samples, or from the goats. So the donkey just slightly edged out the goats, if you want to make it a competition thing. And quite a few of these, anyway, oh yeah, it says the donkeys were more significant for helping grasses than the goats, whereas the goats disperse many shrubs and leguminous forbs, such as lupin and vetches and whatnot, which are very high in nitrogen. I found there in my study of the endangered Andean tapir that one of its most preferred species was the lupin, although it's often thought to be poisonous, but no, not for all these herbivores. For some, it's a very, very rich source of nutrients. Generally showing that more of the species that pass through the gut had successful germination than those who merely clung to the fur or otherwise were spit out or something. So this conditioning by passing through the gut is a very important factor. So now we're talking about fire and the role in helping mitigate catastrophic wildfires. So here's a soil horizon. You just have the first several inches are the topsoil, where the organic materials that are in the process of decomposing, well, actually are on top of the topsoils, and they create the rich topsoils. Then the roots go down to the subsoil, and then into the weathered, decomposed rock, and then to the solid rock. It's really a very elegant phenomena in nature to understand soils and how very important humus is. Now, the real great thing about the horses and burros and all the parasidactyls is they are great contributors to humus. And ask any good master gardener about the importance of humus, and it's just so vital. Really makes all the difference in having a healthy ecosystem. So if they do that, they're making more nutrient-rich soils, and they're also making more water-retaining soils. So they're helping to combat global warming. and restore the earth. So let's let them do their thing. Just going in on the left is a humus poor soil, very little color, and on the right is a richer soil, the darker color. So I made the statement, parasidactyls contribute much less decomposed and much more nutrient-rich quality and quantity droppings than ruminants. And I got that a lot from this soil expert, Bernier. So I have the reference on that, but I've known that for practically all my life. Another thing is they've done some really great studies on humic acid, which is derived from humus, and shows how very important it is for the mycorrhizae, which are the little fungal strands that come out, particularly this glomus, and has a soil protein called glomalin, which is very rich in amino acids. When combined with humus, these amino acids create a huge carbon sequestering and banking factor. So it's no lie to say that these meadows and grasslands are tremendous carbon sinks, and we should allow the wild horse and burros to do their thing, because they help to promote particularly grasses, but a lot of other plants as well. But they're famous for helping meadows. And they don't camp on the riparian areas, the streamside, lakeside areas. They don't linger. Their natural tendency is to come in, tank up in an orderly fashion. If there's various bands, they each take their turn, and they don't really like camp out like the cattle do, because they're from the moisture environment. So if they're there doing their thing and creating rich meadows, then what are the ranchers complaining about? What are the hunters complaining about? They're helping the species that they kill. Not that I'm into that, but just as a point. So yeah, the influent soil resilience. Here's a extremely rare and endangered Java rhino. And that's another thing, is that practically all these animals wallow. And that has a really good effect. And I was trying to tell the Aussies that, hey, wallowing has many really good effects, particularly in dry, arid areas like here in the West, because you have your thunderstorms, particularly in the summer. Being a native Nevadan, I know all about summer cloudbursts. If there's a horse that has done a wallow or a burrow, and a lot of these soils here in the desert are very clayey, creates a natural seal, and it creates a natural pool, which then collects and allows a great variety of animals, birds, lizards, rodents, which the Great Basin is really rich in, to subsist and survive the summer. Even the spadefoot toads, which can seal themselves up, can be greatly aided. There are just so many things that they do. Once you get into it, it's just fascinating. If they go under shelter trees, like the beautiful junipers we have here, they'll often knock off the lower limbs, and then that will prevent the ladder effect for wildfires. And generally, they're munching down the dry vegetation, then prevents the catastrophic fires. And also, they're enriching the soil around these trees, causes the trees to thrive. So in general, I always stress these species are highly mobile and adaptable to a wide variety of elevations, biomes, and resources. Now, just think about the tremendous genetic inheritance they have, having been here for many millions of years, especially in North America. But it's all one world, you know. The species move around, particularly in a lot of interchange in the northern hemispheres. Just to say, oh, they didn't, they were gone here and I don't believe they were ever totally gone, but if they were only gone for 5,000 years or several thousand, any significant number, what is that on the evolutionary scale? And looking at it from a genetic point of view, isn't there great genetic richness, a source for an incredible variety of adaptations that they can develop to survive in various circumstances? That's what I would call their protean nature, Protean. That's their ability to assume various forms and behaviors in order to adapt. And that's why there's been some really good studies on how they are really an ideal species in places all over the world, practically every continent, for restoring degraded ecosystems and combating global warming, restoring biodiversity. So here we're getting in again to the newer thing. It's just, yeah, they're like, you couldn't ask for a better gardener.
Hey,
And
Craig.
places, yeah, are we getting toward
Sorry,
the end
Heather
of the
here.
time?
I'm just looking at our time. And I don't know how many slides you have left, but Heather Brown is she's trying to write down as much information as she can, but she's
Yeah.
wondering if you have a copy of this slideshow presentation available anywhere, such as on your website or anything.
Well, I give this in presentations, but I'd be willing to share some of the slides that she's interested in. I don't know if I just want to make it public because I am invited to give my slideshow, like at universities and places. Uh,
Is some of this stuff in your book, or does your book have
yeah,
a different
yeah. No,
focus?
I'm doing an update now of the Wild Horse Conspiracy. I'm not sure I'll retain that title, but it remains very, I could call it the anti-wild horse conspiracy, but maybe I'll think of a different title. But yeah, I'm doing an update right now. So hopefully that will be out within the year. But yeah, I'd be certainly glad to help share some of this information. I don't know if I just want to blanket give everything to her, but
Yeah, no, no, that's totally understandable. Maybe she can reach out to you on a few of the slides that she's interested in. Is it okay if I put your email address in the chat
Oh
box?
yeah, yeah, absolutely. And also put in my two website. There's the AndeanTapirFund.com and also the wildhorseconspiracy.org has a lot of information. And I know it isn't the best organized website, but it certainly has a wealth of information. And I probably have a germane or applicable study for her interest, and I could guide her. And I've written a number of articles, as you know, as well. I could share with her.
Okay, I'm gonna I put those two links in there, and I'm gonna add your email address as well for anybody which is ccdowner@aol.com, correct?
Correct. That's the best one. And yeah, also the book is still for sale, of course. I have copies myself. She wants personalized, or she can get it on Amazon or Barnes and Noble and other
Okay, so they
places
could
too.
just email you if they want to purchase from you and get a
Yeah,
signed
yeah,
copy.
that would help me out with my work because I have my nonprofit, and I could
Right, right.
personalize it for them and give them some pointers for particular interest.
Okay. Did you want to keep going for a few more minutes, or did you want to do your song, or what would you like to
Yeah,
do?
I'd like to do my song because
Okay.
it was an inspired song that came to me it came to me on the morning of August the 16th. It first came to me as the melody, and I do have these melodies. I think you know that I have melodies that come to me, and I did an earlier musical CD on piano called Wild Horse Rhapsody, and that's also available, by the way. But it was like an old Western ballad style melody, and I said, "Okay, another melody. That's cool. I'll record this one." So went to piano and recorded it on. Uh, but it kept with me all day, and It just wouldn't get out of my head. I said, hey, there's something going on here, you know. So the next morning, it was Saturday, the 17th of August. I said, well, boy, it's still with me. There's something trying to get out here. So I just sat and where the sun comes up over the pine nuts and the sliding door is. I opened the curtains and I just meditated on it for an hour or two. And then came to me these words. So I call it the Mustang song because I really believe it does speak for the Mustang. And these are the words that came to me, and I have copyrighted it now and scored it. Can also play it on the piano. Right, here it goes. I was born on this desert, a fine Mustang and mare of a lineage that's ancient and whose cradle's right here. And I answer a calling in all that I do. Ancient instincts reviving a wisdom so pure. There are men who demean me in all of my kind, saying we have no real right to freedom and land, that our only good place is that of man's slave. Yet I know in my heart there's a calling more great. 'Tis that free life in nature with all kindred kinds, exulting in freedom, obeying God's mind. For we're all here together, all beings, all kinds, and our interrelations are in all places, all times. For there's something more grand than base minds comprehend, a march to God's music that leads to great ends. This march soon to true gallop itself will transform as we spy life's true goal, ever glimpse our true home, our true home. That's it.
That was beautiful, Craig. Thank you very much.
Thanks. Yeah, I think I really was. As you know, I'm very identified with these wonderful horses and the burros too. And
Oh, 100%. I do have one quick question that came in from Heather Brown early on in your presentation, and she asks if you can explain just a little bit more um, why the studies in Africa showed that it was beneficial to have cloven hooves and zebras graze together.
well, the benefit was coming probably the zebras derive some benefit from the others because everyone has this role, and that's a very ancient herbivore complex there in the Serengeti, you know. But it was mainly attributable, I believe, to their manure, the zebra's manure, and that it was enriching the soils and helping the grass, and it was helping a more diverse forage variety of species. But I'd be glad to give that reference. And there's been a number of studies with similar results. But so these people who try to, blame, I call it the blame game. They decide, oh, what's this beautiful equid doing here, hard taking away our grass for our cattle and our deer and sheep, uh, it's just these people are the ones that say, hey, wait a minute, instead of mouthing off, why don't you stop and listen? Because you'll never learn anything unless you learn how to listen and learn what people are and what nature in particular and the horses through observation and zebras and burros are telling you by their very mode of survival and interrelation here. So this is our challenge, but I think we should really get hepped up on it because we're in a critical uh, time today, and we're being challenged by people who don't want to face what mankind has done and continues to do to the living planet. So
Yeah,
we're all
exactly.
being called to be brave souls and to stand up for the greater family of all of life, not just not man apart. It was the motto of David Brower, the famous who I knew. He's a really nice guy, the founder of the Sierra Club.
And Chris is asking, when was the Audubon article?
That Ted Williams, he frequently comes out and bashes the wild horses and burros. If you Google his name, it seems like every few months he's bashing them in the Audubon magazine, at least every year. So
What was
just
his
get
last
get
name
it
again?
get
What
some.
was it? Ted something?
Yeah, Williams. Williams his last name, just sort of like the famous baseball player. Is it same name?
Okay.
Williams. Yeah.
When you
And
mentioned earlier briefly about the Marietta Wild Burro Range, I quickly threw up in the chat box the size, how many acres it is, which is just over 66,000, and that the number of burros that BLM deems appropriate is just between 78 and 184. They recently rounded that area up. Was that a year or two ago?
oh no,
Last
it
year?
was within the past year. It was just recently. They went in I guess in the fall and in the late, I guess it was around October, and they really just gutted that herd. I was so sick, and I had done that appeal to the ISBM, but what really gripes me is those judges. They're supposed to be overseers of the BLM.
Mhm.
They didn't address a single point. All they did was look for a loophole. And I had given support there for many years, clear back to before it was declared a wild burro range. And a range is supposed to be a very special designation where the burros even get better treatment. And it's the only range that's ever been declared for the burros. So yeah, that I was very, very upset about that. And I went out there again and I just before the roundup in late summer, and I found a tripwire. So I figured, well, there's probably some people here know the roundup is coming, and they're trying to capture some of these burros to cash in on them. Because I've become very aware of the illegal captures and removals of the wild horses and burros. And there's a regular pipeline that's uh, whisks them over the Mexican border. And it's
So have
really
you been
it's
back out there since then? Since the roundup? Have you had a chance to go back out?
uh, I know I was there just before, but this other Dr. Sherry Tobin from Pasadena, she's been out there again, and she loved the burros, and she particularly loves the Montgomery Pass wild horses. But I turned her on to the burros. Katja Luis put us in touch because she'd been going there for years. This medical doctor, um, and she was really sick about it, and she said she tried to adopt some of the burros that we had observed there in the summer, and the BLM was pretty rude to her because she had put in some very vociferous complaints about this gutting of the herd, and she could see the burros were not starving, and the vegetation was not a basket case, and they still had water. But we found this tripwire. And so we did get an investigation, official investigation. We got some BLM agents to go out there. And we also found a dead horse in the middle of one of the Teals March watering holes that was contaminating the water hole. And we were wondering whether that horse had been shot through the head. And so we got them to go and investigate that. But it was very cursorial and basically designed to dismiss our complaints. We thought it would be enough to shut down the roundup, that there was signs of very possible, certainly that tripwire, because, they drive horses or burros and they trip on the low slung wire that's wrapped around bushes. When they fall over, then they could go in and lasso them and then haul them into their trucks and cart them off. I'm well aware of these various techniques that the criminals use to victimize our wonderful wild horses and burros.
So I just put a link in the chat, you guys. I have a presentation that I did at the I believe it was at the 2023 Save Our Wild Horses DVC conference. I did Where Are the Wild Burros? And Craig was generous enough to send me some photographs of the burro herds that he had visited, including the Marietta Wild Burro Range. And so if anybody wants to go see any of our wild burro herds, that link that I have there will give you some locations of where you can find our wild burro herds. And, as our last presentators noticed, and Craig would certainly point out too, that we do need to remember our wild burros deserve to be on the range just as much as our wild horses. And they are really fun to go out and photograph, the wild burros are. So if anybody is able to get out and start sharing some photographs of a wild burro herd that you've been able to visit, that would be great. Craig,
Oh,
did you
and
have any
yes, I was going to offer, I can share my entire appeal, which has a great series of pictures, and you'll learn a lot about the burros and how they are so exquisitely adapted to this dry desert in southern Nevada. For example, the thorny salt bush prevents them from actually overgrazing it and is a major food source for them. And I point out a lot of details such as that. I'd be glad to send you my full appeal of about 40 pages, and then about 40 pages, including many really nice pictures of the burros and their ecosystems. Very scenic place. I'd encourage you to go out there. It's just kind of sad now there's so few that are left.
and the person that you said just went out there to see them, how many was she able to see? Did she say?
She only saw, I think it was 17 or 18. She saw them down by the Teals Marsh. All the areas where we had seen them coming in there before, they were all gone. Easy picking. So they probably left the low AML, the low appropriate management level of what, 60 horses or something. Just it was at work out to like about 2 square miles per burro.
Right. Yeah, that's just
Not-
ridiculous, isn't it?
yeah.
Especially for a burro. There's been a couple of questions, and somebody just reminded me, in your opinion, Craig, based on what 9,000 horses and burros rounded up last year and 22,000 the year before in 2023, in your opinion, how many wild horses and burros do you feel we have left on the range?
Gee, I think we only have about 40 at the most.
I would agree with you on that.
Yeah, I think it's much lower than what the BLM says. And remember, the Forest Service is no friend of wild horse and burros either. They act like they're ashamed to even have to admit that they have a duty to save them. And oh, I wanted to say there should be some declaration of special herd study areas under Section 10 of the Wild Free Roaming Horse and Burros Act. And I strongly recommended this Marietta wild burro herd, but that was just water off a duck's back. And I also recommended the Heber horses down in northern Arizona, which I studied, and I did an elaborate peer-reviewed field study and publication on that too, which I can also send you, which goes into considerable details.
Now that herd's not been rounded up for quite some time, right? But they are looking at going after them.
Yeah, it's an ongoing fight, and the International Society for Protection of Mustangs and Burros, that Wild Horse County's original organization, is really fighting the good fight there and trying to get them recognized and not gutted, because they're actually a very popular herd, but there are certain very kind of violent people there that have targeted him. And every once in a while, you hear about, especially around Christmas time, New Year's, you hear about someone going out and shooting him. And that's been going on for years, and they have still not apprehended a single criminal, which
That's
kind of tells
crazy.
you something about how much they care. But I'd be glad to share that study. And I really take the Forest Service to task there about how miserable they've been throughout the West in honoring their duty to protect their wild horses and burros.
And I
Uh,
don't know if you heard about the Murderers Creek herd that is joint managed by the Forest Service in Central Oregon near Bend.
I just heard
That
a little bit about it today.
they plan to go in and zero that herd out, and we really don't even know how many horses are left out there after the wildfire. Just went through there in what was it? I think September, October. A wildfire went through that area.
Uh,
And I'm not sure
yeah,
anybody's even actually spotted horses since then, but they do plan on going in and zeroing that one out now.
well, I'm hoping that Doug Burgum, who's just been appointed the Secretary of Interior and cleared the Congress, will really step up to the plate here. He seemed to be a much more honorable man than a lot of those Republicans. He has a conscience on this regard because he helped save the Theodore Roosevelt National Park wild horses. So I bet you he'd be a man of moral courage and make President Jimmy Carter, who was kind of a hero of mine, proud.
Yeah, we certainly hope so. And, mentioning that, Chris, I believe, is working on, and I don't know if she wants to talk about it now or save it for another couple days, but she is working on an action item that we can do to send to our legislators to let them know that we are not happy with their interim BLM director. And I can't remember his name right now. Chris, do you want to talk about that for a quick second?
Yeah, John Raby. I did I posted it on our in a blog called Uh-oh, I think it was earlier this week, a couple days ago. And there's a one-click action that people can take, and it'll send an email to your own legislators, letting them know that you don't approve of him. We understand this is temporary. We understand there are administration changes happening, but we do not approve of him as a long-term BLM director, and for Congress to do what they can to make sure that doesn't happen. So again, our legislators aren't going to read our minds. We have to let them know, and we have to just continue to speak up as loud as we can. So I'll put the link in the chat so people can go directly to the action.
Okay, I
That'd
know
be
him
great.
personally, and he's not been a friend of the wild horses. I will put in a serious complaint there. For
And the
those
more
who,
of us that take that action item and contact our legislators about that, the more that they're going to know that we don't want him in that position. So it is vitally important that everybody on this call, and everybody who sees Chris's blog, share that out, ask your friends and family, share it with other advocates that you know, so that we can hopefully get somebody else more worthwhile put into the position of managing our wild horses and burros.
so I put the link directly to the action item in the chat. It literally will take you a minute. I do believe that you have no, I think that, yeah, it'll literally just take you a minute. All you have to do is just fill out your address so that it knows who your legislator is, and it'll send an email. I've already gotten responses from my legislators, like, thank you for, it's a form letter, like, thank you for contacting us about this, but at least you know that it's read, and then, we just wait and see what happens. So
Perfect. Thank
thank
you,
you, Terry.
Chris.
yeah, I was just going to say, for people who have been looking at this slide, there were these wild horses that established themselves on the southwest coast of Africa, this area called Namib no Luft Park, and then they assigned a PhD student to study them with the understanding that he would totally discredit them as ecological misfits. And his name was Talane Grayling. And by examining actually what was happening, he found they were greatly benefiting this extremely dry area. And now they're a great they're considered a great asset to the national park that actually complemented these endangered oryx and helped them survive. So this should be a great encouragement to us to not be overwhelmed by what seems to be a brick wall, you know, with so-called establishment or authorities.
Great. All right. Well, does anybody else have any questions for Craig today? We're getting a little close to our end time here. Craig, so anybody who wants Craig's paper, that he was talking about earlier, just send him an email. I did put his email in the chat box up there a little further up, so you can grab that and contact him. A bunch of people have already done Chris's action item, which is great. And yeah, I think, did you have any closing items that you wanted to cover really quickly, Greg?
Yeah, that it's really a critical time now, and that for everyone who does care about these beautiful animals that have done so much for us, it's time to step up to the plate and get out of our comfort zone and become inventive and go outside the box, you know, and we can win, we can prevail after all these people that seem to be trying to bulldoze the wild horse and burros are human after all, just like us, and they can change, and we don't have to bow down to them. So that is my rally plea to all of you. And thank you so much for listening to me. I'd be glad to share my studies and my works with you. Thank you so much, and God bless you all.
Thank you so much, Craig, for your time today. Thank you, everybody, for joining us, and hopefully we will see you all again tomorrow for another new set of presentations. Have a great evening, everybody.
Hey, good evening.